Did you know that barbers need more training hours to start working than police do? That would be funny if it wasn't true. Are you stunned? I was. What kind of world do we live in when you need more training time to use a curling iron than to use a gun? 6 years ago, I made a video called Same Story. I mean, the names in the cities changed, but it's the same story. They say he was unarmed, not a gun or a knife, yet the cop felt it right to end his life. That was 6 years ago. And today, it's the same story. I'm no prophet, Nostradamus, nor did I make a gamble. I just know these reruns will keep happening because the world is stuck on the same channel. I don't need to see Annalise and How to Get Away with Murder because cops do that every day. Just think about the countless people who don't make it home, who aren't known, because they weren't lucky enough to have those crimes recorded with an iPhone. Listen, we can march, protest, pray, and post, and that's good, we should. But it won't solve this. Racism runs deep. Just Google the dog test. This is gonna keep happening until we realize there's no place for bad apples in a career that's life or death. Chris Rock said it best. That's like an airline saying, some of our pilots like to land, but some of the bad apples, they like to crash, and that's something we just have to accept. No, so ain't no moving on until we get caring people with quality training wearing these blue uniforms. Don't you get it? The country of Finland went from the bottom in education to the top within a few years. Want to know how they did it? They made teaching a prestigious career. They said you have to have a master's degree to be a teacher. Well, we must do the same thing here. Being a cop is not a prestigious career. That's clear, and I don't mean to be a cynic, but a cop told me once that you get officer of the month if you write the most tickets. To all the police out there, listen. You have the right to remain silent for 1 minute. Give me your undivided, just for this part. Do not let the metal in that badge block the energy of your heart. I know your world is gloomy. You see people at their ugliest, so I imagine it is hard to see their beauty. The only problem is, this is your duty. You signed up for this job, and out of respect, you do not get to step on the necks, nor the human rights of the people you swore to protect. Liberty and justice for all means every color. There's no escaping it, no running away from it. If a person's skin is seen as a weapon, they will always be considered armed and extremely dangerous. So please, be tough on crime, but also be a decent human being. And if you can't, just quit. Because you are not what we need. All we want to do is breathe. And if you still can't empathize, ask yourself this question. What if it was you on the other side?
Wow, that was a very, very powerful and emotional video. And so, man, and I think that's why this conversation right now is so appropriate. So I am honored to invite to the virtual stage my mentor, my friend, someone who cares deeply about this community, someone who has been working to resolve community and law enforcement issues for a very long time. His name is Dwayne Bryant. He's a moderator of this prestigious panel. And after I graduated from FIU last year, he took it upon himself to personally mentor me and help me to get me in the positions where I am now. And so I'd like to thank Dwayne Bryant for that publicly. And I'd like to pass on the baton to Dwayne Bryant to bring on our next guest. So thank you so much, Dwayne Bryant. The floor is yours now.
Thank you very much, Jefferson. First of all, how are you doing, man? I got a chance to sit in on the last bit of the last panel, and it was outstanding. But how are you doing? How are you feeling?
I'm feeling a lot better. I feel like this conversation is really helping me to just put things into perspective, and it's giving me a lot of hope.
Okay, excellent, excellent, excellent. So should I just go ahead and get started, or do you want to introduce the panel, or you want me to just take it away?
Yeah, take it away, and the panelists can turn on their video now, and then you can have them introduce themselves and then get started.
Okay, I see Mr. Kim Patrick is there. We're waiting on Sheriff Tony, Captain Moss.
Yeah,
okay.
Sheriff Tony, I can hear you all, but I have not been allowed access to open the video yet.
All right, Jefferson Noel, come on now. We need to see this powerful brother. Let him on. Is Representative Keon McGee there? And Captain Delbert Moss. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and get started. All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Black Male Media Project, Conversations with Cops, sponsored by the National Association of Black Journalists, South Florida. Now, the flyer says our goal today is to build trust between law enforcement and the community. Now, you know, if you're watching any news outlet, if you're listening to any radio program, right now, trust between police and community, especially the Black community, is at an all-time low. But I don't know if I'm convinced. However, we have assembled an outstanding panel of gentlemen that I'm going to introduce to you in just a moment. So if there will be an opportunity to build trust between police and community, then these are the men who can lead this conversation. My name is Dwayne Bryant. I have the pleasure of moderating this panel of gentlemen from law enforcement, politics, and the community. On our panel today, we have Captain Delbert Moss, Captain with the Florida International University Police Department, and I'm a proud alumni of FIU. Paul's up, FIU, absolutely. Everyone who's a Panther knows exactly what I'm talking about. Secondly, we have Sheriff Gregory Tony. He's the sheriff, the top man in the Broward County Sheriff Department, one of the largest counties in the state of Florida. Then we have Mr. Kenneth Kilpatrick. He's the head of the Bronzeville Civic Neighborhood Association and the Alternatives, or the TAP program. Last but not least, we have Representative Keon McGee, Democratic member of the Florida House of Representatives, representing the 117th district. Now, before we get started, let me give you the backdrop. Our nation is in crisis. People are protesting all around the country and the world for that matter. Police brutality, police murdering innocent Black citizens, police violating the First Amendment and the Fourth Amendment rights of its citizens. Black people in America are at the center of two public health crises, COVID-19 and police brutality. According to the APA, the American Psychological Association, quote, we are living in a racist pandemic. According to the AMA, the American Medical Association, police brutality, racism, and COVID-19 has uniquely and detrimentally impacted the health of Black communities. That means that racism and police brutality is being compared to a deadly virus. Both are literally killing us. Before we dive into some powerful conversations, I would like each of the panelists to take a minute or so to introduce themselves, tell us what you feel about the current climate in America, give us some highlights about yourselves as well as your career, and if you have one solution to the problem, feel free to state that, and then we're going to jump right into the panel. So let's get started with Sheriff Gregory Tony.
Sure, good afternoon, Dwayne. Thanks for the great overview about what we are dealing with here in the country, specifically when it relates to Black people and Black men in this country. You were spot on on the assessments. I really didn't need to hear the statistics and data points that you mentioned because I've been living them for 41 years. Roughly 17 months ago, I was honored to be appointed the first Black sheriff in 105 years of this agency's history. And coming into this organization, it was clear that I was not going to only have to take on, systematic failures for active shooter training and preparedness, but also looking at the importance of diversifying this organization and ensuring that we get to a level of true accountability and transparency. Over the last year or so, we have, as an organization here at BSO, have dealt with a multitude of excessive force when it comes to police officers' conduct. I had to fire deputies for beating a young Black man in handcuffs. I had to fire deputies for beating a man in handcuffs that was attached in a medical facility. I had to fire a deputy who slammed a young 15-year-old Black male, DeLuca Roll, face into the ground and terminate him. And so these actions were taken understanding that all it takes is one incident and the country burns. And now we're seeing it. We are literally seeing it and we're absorbing it. We have to respond. But there is a multitude of things that we have to interject and put in place from a law enforcement perspective to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And I'll be happy to talk more in depthly about it. But before I, pass the torch over to let my other colleagues introduce themselves, I would be amiss to not say this, that I was Floyd. Growing up as a teenager in the inner cities of North Philadelphia, I've been literally slammed on the ground and had that knee on my neck and know what it's like to grasp for air and hope that somebody would recognize me as a human being and treat me with decency. And it was the inspiring force as to why I'm here now. So I look forward to answering any questions you all have.
Hey, man, I appreciate that. That was a great introduction. I couldn't have done it any better. Thank you very much. Captain Delrich Moss, over there with the FIU Panthers. How you doing, brother?
I'm good. Thank you. And welcome. Thank you for having me this morning.
Thank you.
So just going into my brief history, as a lot of people here know, I spent 32 years with the Miami Police Department, grew up, born and raised right here in Miami. And then in 2016, I was tapped to be the first African-American to take up the mantle and become police chief in the city of Ferguson, Missouri, which was actually the hardest job that I've ever had in my life. So I understand and I watch Sheriff Tony all the time because I understand a lot of what he's going through. Mm-hmm. Some good shared experiences. But like Sheriff Tony also, I came into law enforcement after a couple of negative experiences with law enforcement myself, and I decided that it was in my best interest to take up the mantle and become a police officer so that I could provide better service for the community than I thought we were getting. Yeah, as my grandmother used to say, you can't clean a house if you're not in it. And so I decided to get into law enforcement, and now I've spent the better part of 35 years in law enforcement at my third department now, FIU. Go Panthers. And, but like everybody else here, I've been looking at the things that are happening around the country, and they're not that foreign to me to a great degree. In Miami, as you know, when I started law enforcement, I came in right after riots, and then I came in on the front end of riots also because I was the police officer who was dealing with protests, but I also lived in a neighborhood where protests happened right outside my door. And so I've watched this, and it's been disheartening, but also there's a ray of hope in this. It's been disheartening in that in 35 years, you'd think that we'd not be at the same place that we're at. But it's been a ray of hope because this is the very first time that I've ever seen one incident so galvanize the world that there are protests in just about every single country on the planet, and certainly in all 50 states. And that means that people have to listen now. When issues happened in Ferguson, people pointed the finger at Ferguson and said, how do we fix that? When things happened in Miami, people pointed the finger at Miami and said, how do we fix that? Same for Cincinnati and Baltimore and everywhere else. But right now, I guarantee you that every single police leader in this profession is looking at their department and looking at how they make systemic changes to ensure that they don't have some of the same issues that we're seeing in Minneapolis right now.
Okay, thank you very much. This is great. Now we have Representative Keon McGee. Now, before you speak, brother, is that your beautiful house or is that green screen with that nice thing in the background? What's going on over there? That house is clean.
No, brother, I'm on the phone with too many law enforcement officers. I'm not about to incriminate myself, so I'm gonna leave that one alone.
Got you.
Nah, it's a green screen. It's a green screen courtesy of my wife, man. I appreciate it. Hey, man, let me just say this to you, man. I am honored and privileged to be on this call with such a dynamic group of gentlemen. These are some major role models for us to look up to. I've worked with quite a few of you on this call, and I know the quality and the character, but more than anything, the caliber of people we have on this phone. Listen, I served as a prosecutor here in Miami-Dade County under Catherine Fernandez-Rondo. But before that, man, I was beaten by the cops in 1997 in a hospital, in an emergency room. I was thrown to the ground by 4 or 5 of them, knee to the neck, knee to the back, punched in the rib, face pushed down into the floor, taken to jail, and charged with some ridiculous charges. But the reality of it is we found a way to get around it. We beat the charge. We eventually sued the department, And at that moment, I decided to become a prosecutor, but more than anything, I decided to be an agent of change. And so that's why I went on to the State House of Representatives and worked my way up to be leader of the caucus. And here we are, ready to fight, ready to change and do what needs to be done.
Wow, you know what? That's amazing, because it sounds like every brother on this panel has experienced police brutality. And I know it is very common, but it should not be a birthright of being a Black male in America that you must be beaten, stomped, kneed, kicked by police officers in order to become successful, because that's just a heavy burden. So hopefully we're going to figure out what are the solutions to change this. Last but not least, we have Mr. the heavyweight, irrefutable, undisputable, Kenneth Kilpatrick. Tell us who you are, sir.
I'm Ken Kilpatrick. I'm going to file just a short grievance for having to go behind all of these. That's not fair, and I'll send something to the president. Ken Kilpatrick, I am president of Brownsville Civic Neighborhood Association. If you guys who are familiar with Brownsville, it is a community in the model city community in the heart and urban core of Miami-Dade County. And I'm also executive director of the Georgia Heirs Alternative Program. And for those who remember Georgia Heirs, you remember her valiant fights for community and police relations dating back to the 60s and moving up through the 70s. And then her work with Janet Reno in the early 80s to start the alternative program to provide those alternatives to incarceration for those who could not afford a bond. So I'm so pleased to be a part of this distinguished panel again, and to answer your question about just one brief solution that I'd like to offer. I want us to look at, well, one of the things that Georgia Heirs did that a lot of folks are not paying attention to or giving enough credence to is she was very adamant. She was a proponent for African-American leadership in law enforcement and in the criminal justice system. That was one of her cornerstones of advocacy throughout the many decades that she served here in Miami-Dade County. She pushed for individuals who were African-American to be chiefs, directors, down to lieutenants, commanders, whatever it was. And in the criminal justice system, lawyers, giving them the proper opportunities and pushing individuals to run for judge and supporting Black judges in the criminal justice system. So I want to look at some point when we start talking about solutions, of course, we do have to look at, things like the Bill of Rights for law enforcement officers. But I think we need to be very smart about that. And I tie that to the whole concept of African-American law enforcement officers. I think, and I'm not in law enforcement, but I think that it's pretty prevalent that if you had 100 complaints and let's say 30 of those complaints were against African-American officers, there's probably a higher chance that, those complaints against African-Americans may be substantiated, than their white counterparts. Now, that could present a problem long term, if you go on the federal level, let's say, and you say, well, let's go ahead and eliminate qualified immunity altogether. We need to think about how that's going to impact African-American officers, which is, I think, one of the solutions that we need to look at is more African-Americans on the street. I don't think it's so much training people who are not from our community as it is putting people in our community and from our community on the streets and giving them a badge. So I think that's something that we need to get together and sort of take advantage of this momentum, and let's push for more officers that look like us. And I think because when you think about a spur of the moment scenario where a person has to act fast, nothing beats an African-American man or woman with a badge confronting someone who from our community who may not be as aggressive as someone from outside of our community may perceive. And again, you know, training can only go so far. At some point, we've got to start pushing for us to get the badge and to be promoted within the ranks.
All right. Thank you very much. Well, gentlemen, we are about to get ready to have a serious conversation because I know our viewing audience would definitely love that. I'm trying to get there we go. All right, so this is what we're gonna do. We only have a limited amount of time and we have literally thousands of people streaming from Facebook to different platforms as well as this Zoom platform. So what I'm gonna do is ask questions and then I want you to give me your answer. Now I have adult ADD, so if it gets to go on a little bit long, then I'm gonna kind of say, come on guys, we gotta get ready to the next question. So I wanna start with law enforcement because that's where the focus is right now. So the question is, what do you think police responsibility is to the community? And do you think that the police have a responsibility to build better relations, especially within the Black community? If so, what is that responsibility? And before I go to that question, I remember earlier, Sheriff Tony mentioned that he had to fire people. So a subsection is, when you have to fire a police officer, is it easy? Do you have to battle the unions? I mean, what is the pressure? Even if a police officer kills someone, what is some of that pressure that you have to face yourself as a captain, as a sheriff, as the top man in law enforcement? And how difficult is it to really begin to improve police and community relations? Sheriff Tony, we're going to start with you.
Sure, I'll backtrack from your the sequence of questions. I'll start with, yes, it's very difficult to terminate an employee, especially a law enforcement officer. Kenneth mentioned that there's a multitude of protections. So there's the Bill of Rights for law enforcement, there's Chapter 112 that affords some certain due process elements. But that is not an excuse at the administrative level to do what is right and hold people accountable. Oftentimes, administrators are faced with considerations of, hey, if I terminate him, will I win the arbitration? If I terminate him, is he going to get his job back? And I think that has impacted leadership to just make the right decision. Stop thinking so far ahead because communities are expecting you to lead and do the things that are right. So one of the things that I have done, in addition to making sure we can have that level of accountability and trust with the public, is to bring in a much more diverse professional standards committee, which is part of that recommendation board that we have here. And we have senior law enforcement members on there and we have civilians. But in this organization, the past precedent was that the union membership would bully the civilians and bully law enforcement personnel in these professional standards committee. So I basically removed the entire committee, started from scratch, promoted minorities into these positions. I brought in reputable attorneys that are minorities to sit in these civilian capacities because we don't want just any civilian. We want people that can sit there and articulate and fight with truth and education to make sound arguments against our law enforcement members that may be seated there. That was crucial. I also hired a judge, Julio Gonzalez, a reputable judge here in Broward County. He's a Dominican brother, so he's dark enough. He's been through it. He and I talk, and he's been on the ground, and he's had his share of police negative encounters. So that's essential, being able to make those tough decisions, putting the checks and balances in place. But I've also mentioned the importance of, we don't always want to be retroactive. If we are disciplining somebody, the harm has already happened to the community.
Right.
And so we have to invest in things that make sense. Just the other day, I've had multiple meetings with the Broward Chiefs of Police. I got them on board to where I've invested $1 million into putting racial equity and implicit bias training into the law enforcement hands, into every single police officer that serves this county, so that they
now what does that look like? Because I've sat in some of those trainings, and literally I've sat in some police trainings and they're talking about implicit bias, explicit bias, and some of the police were like, yeah, whatever. I mean, there was literally no interest in listening to what the presenter was saying.
And you know what, that's always the case. But what I will also tell you from my experiences with my command staff and our law enforcement officers that we put in, they may start out thinking that this is just another cultural awareness class. But in our racial equity implicit bias training, it goes through a historic account of why we have the current biases and prejudice within our entire criminal justice system, because it's not just law enforcement, it's our courts, it's our corrections, it's every avenue that we protect and safeguard.
Okay.
So I understand that, but what I have seen is more receptiveness to it, especially during this time.
Okay, got it. No, we got you. We got to go to Captain Moss. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So when it comes to police responsibility of building relationships, it's most certainly our responsibility to build relationships. We often talk about protect and serve. When I got to Ferguson, one of the things we did was we changed that. It's serve and protect. Because one of the things that we have to realize is that we're given the privilege to come out and enforce law. We're given the privilege to come out and act in this particular manner. You know, I always say that on a day-to-day basis, a police officer exercises more power than the President of the United States, because at the stroke of his hand, he can take away your freedom. He can change the course of your life in terms of what job you can get. But to whom much is given, much is absolutely required. And so it is incumbent upon us to get out and build relationships. One of the things we started in Ferguson was me as a chief with my staff. We knocked door to door. We knocked on every single door in Ferguson, much smaller place, so I could do that. But we knocked on every single door in Ferguson to ask them what they wanted, what their thoughts were about the police, and how we could work to improve. Even in policy-making decisions, we added a citizen component where, as we fashioned policies and tried to live within the confines of that consent decree, we had a panel where we went to the citizens and said, this is the new policy. This is what we're hoping to do. How can you help us better fashion this policy?
Was the community receptive to that?
The community was very receptive, but you got to remember that when I went to Ferguson, they were ripe for change. They were, you know, we had a 70% African-American community that had no Black representation. They had 3 Black officers on the police department. They had 3 women on the police department. And so by the time I left, it was 50% African-American and a third women. Wait
a minute. You went from almost 95% or 97% white male police officers in a 70% Black city, and you have 50% police officers, a good percent women. Okay, why didn't you get pushed out of town? Why didn't they put a knee on your Black neck? I mean, how were you able to do that? Let's be real. I mean, that is unheard of.
Well, there were a number of things that happened, and don't think there weren't those who wanted me out of town, because
I lived in St. Louis.
I'll put it this way. Oftentimes when cars pass by my house late at night, and I got a lot of pushback from a lot of the political body there. But, you know, one of the things that happened was, just by a change in leadership, police officers were actually attracted to coming to the police department. But I also had those who decided, you know what, they just weren't going to take orders from a Black man. And one actually sat down and had that conversation with me. And
he told you that, I'm not used to taking orders from a Black man.
He said, I'm not used to taking orders from a Black man, and so I'm leaving the department. And I told him, I'm glad you told me that now, so I didn't have to invite you to leave in the future. So, you know, we've had we've had a great deal of change and turnaround there, but those things don't come easily. Those things don't come without the support of a large swath of the community. And so it's incumbent upon us as leaders to build relationships, especially with our communities, because those are the ones who support us in the changes that we're trying to make with regard to policing.
Absolutely. Real quick question. I'm going to keep interrupting. Earlier, Mr. Kilpatrick mentioned we need more Blacks on the police force.
Yes.
In Chicago, they had a huge initiative where they were saying, we're going to get more Blacks on the police force. We're going to get 10,000. But when they actually did the recruitment, many African Americans were not passing the police test. Many were not passing the physical. Many were not passing the drug test. So it's one thing to say, yo, let's get on the police force, but it's another thing to pass the criteria. Are the criteria racially biased, or are Black people just not passing?
Let me say this about that. So
and you want to hit that too? Both.
In Ferguson, one of the things I looked at is I wanted to look at all the files of people who had been discriminated, well, not discriminated against, look at all the files of people who had been eliminated in the process prior to my arrival, because a lot of times that bias is actually in the process. That's why I was the final decision on all disqualifications or qualifications coming onto the department. I had to micromanage in that fashion. I had one officer who, when he was 16 years old, he did a rap video where he was using, you know, it was a profane-laced rap video.
At 16?
At 16. He was disqualified at 26 after he...
What's his name, Keon McGee?
You're wrong. Turned out okay.
But he was disqualified because of that video at 26. Wow. Time in the Navy. He had gotten honors in college. He had gone on to be married. He was a volunteer in the community, and he was doing all the right things since that video, and they disqualified him. So then I looked at the files of people who were qualified and people who were disqualified, and I found bias in that process.
So there's even racism within the process.
It really boils down to who are the gatekeepers.
Wow.
You watch the gatekeepers as much as you watch everything else, because a lot of times we're not given the benefit of the doubt. And in this particular case, I actually went back to that officer, and he became an officer under my watch, and he's actually doing a stellar job there now. So you have to look at these processes also, because a lot of times there's bias in the process, and a lot of times there are people keeping the gate who have their biases as well.
Got it.
You have to look at that as a leader.
Okay. Sheriff Tony, same question to you. Is it difficult? Because I keep hearing we got to get more Black people on the force. We got to have more brown. Is it as easy as getting more Black people on the force? And are Black people qualified? Or is it what Captain Moss just said? Even though they may be qualified, you have the gatekeepers who are systematically trying to minimize Black people joining the force.
Dwayne, the chief nailed it. What Chief Moss had outlined is true, and we went through a similar process here, and it's always interesting because he and I haven't had that conversation as of yet. But when I first came in, the key thing I wanted to do was diversify the entire command staff. Kenneth brought this up. I promoted more minorities to senior ranking executive positions of colonels, majors, etc. But then we realized we needed to hire at that baseline, bring in more minorities at the patrol level. And we looked, and I promoted a Jamaican brother down over HR and said, I want you to take a deep dive and look at our application process and show me some comparisons as to what was occurring with our white brothers and sisters versus our Black. And it was the exact same thing what Chief Moss identified.
Really?
We had to go out and make that phone call and said, hey, round 2, it's available. Come on in. We want to hear about the set of circumstances that you didn't get the chance to articulate. And we've hired more Black members over the last 17 months and put them out on the patrol capacity. Now, that's an interesting thing because, the chief and I never talked about that particular issue, and he absorbed the same type of experience.
So let me say thank you to both of you all for your leadership and understanding that we have to watch the gatekeepers, because today I want to talk solutions, and it sounds like one solution for every community. See, everyone is saying, what can I do? What can I do? Whether you're Black, you're white, every community can say, hey, what is your criteria for hiring law enforcement? What is your criteria for not hiring law enforcement? And we want to be a part of that process to help keep the gate. All right, we're going to move on. Keon McGee, at the end of the day, people are looking to state legislators to form laws to prevent violence and increase accountability. What are some laws that you and your colleagues are writing to make that reality? And the second part of that question is, what do you think about qualified immunity?
Great 2 questions. And the first question I'm going to deal with is we have to deal with the Police Bill of Rights. That's actually in statute. It's actually in state statute now. Can you hear me pretty good?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay. Yeah, the Police Bill of Rights is actually in state statute. So we have to figure out a way to deal with that. Obviously, we're out of session right now, but my colleagues right now are actually drafting language that will address the language that's not there inside of the current Bill of Rights. Secondly, the qualified immunity. Listen, the reality of it is it had something to do with me personally as it relates to my being a law enforcement officer. I always wanted to be a police officer. I always wanted to go into JAG. But at the end of the day, these certain individuals are just immune. They have this qualified immunity that's given to them by the state that gives them a right to do things and say things and whether or not they believe is rightfully so or not. It gives them coverage. And so we're going to deal with that when we get back to Tallahassee. Obviously, some members are calling for a special session right now to deal with it. I'm working with both Republicans, Democrats, local organizations to actually come up with a game plan about possibly heading back to Tallahassee during this time to have a special session. But as you are aware, there are some gatekeepers, and we're going to keep using that word because it's actually on point. There are gatekeepers out there who do not want to see this change come about because they have the numbers as it relates to controlling the legislature, controlling the cabinet. And make no mistake about it, it is real. People think that it's not real. People think that, it's just it's something that we make up when we say, well, we go up there to fight, but we don't have as many numbers, so people need to vote in order for us to change and deal with things such as qualified immunity. And listen, if anybody has seen the way qualified immunity works here, myself as a former prosecutor, I've seen it in the courtroom as it worked out and how it sometimes benefited and more often hurt most victims because they didn't have access to certain information and the right to cross-examination certain people.
That's powerful. So let me play devil's advocate a little bit, because Kenneth said earlier, with qualified immunity, now police officers can get sued, police officers can be challenged in court. And he mentioned earlier that many Black officers may get complaints. And I'm thinking about what Captain Moss said. What if a white person just can't stand a Black police officer giving them a command, telling them, hey, you were going 80 miles per hour and now I'm stopping you because I'm upholding the law. For that white person, as you call gatekeeper, I'm just called a racist, a white supremacist, because they don't care who you are. They don't care if you're Sheriff Tony, if you Captain Moss, your black behind come in a uniform, NI, whatever. I don't have to listen to you. So then will that hurt disproportionately Black police officers? Because now a racist will find a reason to complain. So what do you think about it?
What I found out in life, and I dealt with this firsthand, and many of us on this phone call has, you when they're racist, they're racist. Mm-hmm. And when they have bad intent, they have bad intent. I've seen some of the greatest leaders of this community receive reprimands and receive complaints because the person who they stopped or the person who they're dealing with or some other organization did not like them simply for the purpose of their skin. So we cannot regulate how these people are going to react, but what we can do is put models in place that will give us protection when we act a certain way. For instance, look, I'm all for the independent review board council for these members of the community to actually have a participation opportunity to deal with certain acts. So, we can't stop the racists from being racist, but what we can do is put up some different type of gatekeepers that will police the gatekeeper.
Understood. And I'm understanding that Captain Moss and Sheriff Tony may have to leave soon. So what I was going to do, Kenneth, I was getting ready to ask you a question, but I'm going to throw a question up to them first, and then we'll definitely come back to you to make sure you get plenty of talk time. Sheriff Gregory Tony, sorry. There's been a lot of protests and altercations between police and protesters in Fort Lauderdale. How can your police force maintain order while preventing the same police style aggression that people are protesting in the first place? Second question is, what are you doing to win the hearts of the Black community? Because I understand the Black community is not happy with law enforcement right now. And the last thing, sorry to hit you with so much, but you got to go, so I got to hit you. What is the last activity that you've organized that was community focused, and what was the outcome? So community organization that you organized for the community, what was the outcome? What are you doing to win the hearts of the Black community? Because right now they've been hurt, they distrust law enforcement. And what are you doing to ensure that your police officers during this time of protest do not commit the same atrocities that we saw with George Floyd? Uh-oh, you're muted. Sheriff Tony, you're muted.
Yep, how's
There you
that?
go.
Yeah, one of the core things in terms of making sure we mitigate any type of harms or rioting that may occur out here where our deputies are putting hands on or using force is the messaging aspect about being much more sensitive and understanding that we cannot afford to allow any more electrifying activity to take place because someone doesn't have the appropriate temperament to understand that what's going on. Every organization in this county has called us to some shape or degree to support them in monitoring protests. And by the way, the protests that's been occurring here in Broward County through Black Lives Matter and other civic groups have been done outstanding. Not enough credit has been given to these people because when they come out, it's organized, it's well structured, and there's not controversy. There's a few agitators that pop up there with the hopes to create problems, and many of them are white. Mm-hmm. And that's not being said enough in this entire country. But from what I've seen from
So you're saying white people are coming into Black neighborhoods, writing, spraying, breaking windows. It almost seems to me that that's like a dual diabolical white supremacist plan. We kill them on the front end, and then we go into the neighborhoods and we destroy it. So now, and a few years from later, we can get regentrification and come in and buy it cheaply. That just seems diabolical. People particularly white America, does not believe people will do something like that. But you just said it is happening.
It's happening. It's all over social media. I look at it in our intel reports and see the same videos. So you can't hide the truth. But if you don't speak on it, then no one's being educated. And trying to win the black community support back into it, interjecting all these things that I've started, from early warning systems, holding people accountable, creating a professional standards committee, making sure we have an honorable judge manage these things, and then being part of the community. Getting out of our cars, getting out, walking, engaging, and not being afraid to walk in a predominantly black community. We can't have that. We can't wait for atrocities to take place to hope that the community is going to actually support us. And then you had a third part, which was?
Oh, the third part was, have you developed events or community events to try to win the hearts towards law enforcement? And what was the outcome?
Absolutely. And I appreciate the notion of trying to win their hearts, but we need to build authentic relationships. It's not about just winning their hearts today and forget about them tomorrow. But we've called multiple community meetings where just yesterday I had civic groups from Black Lives. I had Jasmine from Black Lives Matter movement. I had a ton of different long-term community activists who have been waiting for a chance to sit down with the sheriff, who wasn't going to talk about it, but was going to be about it. And instantly, you can see the engagement. We didn't have to wait for ideas. People had concepts and things that they've been pushing since the 1960s. Mm-hmm. Just didn't capitalize on it. And so now I always say this: I have $1 billion operating budget with a B, 278 million.
Hold on. A black man with $1 billion budget.
You stay focused. $278 million of that budget is responsible for incarceration. It goes to our jails. And that is disproportionately also when it comes to who's in jail. The majority is black and brown people. If we're going to spend $278 million to keep people in, I would think we could spend several million to keep them out.
Absolutely.
And so we're
being proactive versus being reactive.
Absolutely. And giving people an opportunity to see the better side of this organization. We're not just cops. I have accountants. I have lawyers. I have finance directors. There's a lot of employment opportunities out here, and I want to bring people from the community and not allow people to come from out of the state and take these seats and not give them to people that actually live here.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And I know you got to go. Shameless plug. I wrote the book, The Stop Improving Police and Community Relations. I need some of that $1 billion budget, so I'm going to get in contact with you, because while they sitting in jail, they need to be reading in jail.
Hey, Dwayne, send me a copy, 2601 Broward Boulevard, Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
I'm not going to send it. I'm going to bring it.
I want one too.
Same address. I'll see y'all soon. I'm sorry I got to run.
Thank you.
Chief Moss, always thank you for being a strong support and mentor to me, sir, and for everything that you've done. I love you.
Thank you. I love you too, man. And you keep up the good work. And I'm there with you.
Chief Moss, I know you got to get back to FIU because you guys are about to have a protest on campus. So my last question for you is, right now, it's the students that are leading the protest, the marching, the passion, the power. I'm a graduate of FIU, loved FIU, love the diversity, love the passion on the campus. What do you do? How do you lead this generation and the anger? Because I talk to activists in Chicago, some are saying, D, it's time to burn this down. So how do you take that energy, that passion that's happening on a global front and harness it into something powerful and productive?
Well, I think the first thing that we have to do is we have to listen to that energy. We have to listen to those students. I've developed a really good relationship here. The police department here, we've developed a really good relationship with the students. In fact, the organizer of today's protest and I've been on the phone since yesterday, just making sure that they had what they needed so they could feel free to express themselves in a positive and productive way. But one of the things is you got to give them a voice, because a lot of times in those voices is when things are heard and things are said that are ideas that us guys who are slightly north of 50 don't necessarily have. Listening, encouraging, and building, like the sheriff said, building real positive relationships helps tremendously in terms of getting things to go in a more positive direction.
Yeah.
Emotions are not always with us. I used to tell my staff when I was the chief of Ferguson, if I'm the only one in this room thinking, I'm giving away too many paychecks. I have ideas out there, and I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I know how to listen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is powerful. And you know what? When you said listen, I think that is so powerful. What do you think about the police departments that are actually kneeling? Because some higher level authority does not want. I mean, President Trump totally was against kneeling. Now I'm seeing police departments kneeling. Is that showing that we support you as protesters? Is that showing we don't respect what the president is saying? What does that mean when police departments or officers are kneeling? And do they have to have the captain's permission to do that, or can they do that individually?
So it doesn't say that we don't respect who leadership is. What it does say is we hear what you're saying, and because we're members of this community just like you, a lot of the same sentiments. When I see a police officer acting badly, when I see a police officer abusing somebody, it bothers me because that could be my son. That could be me. Yeah, I'm blue about 8 to 10 hours a day, but I'm black all the time. And so, you know, it's very important that I remember that. And you know, and I have to say, one of the first officers that I saw kneel was Captain Harry Dilworth in Ferguson. He's a black captain. When I promoted him, he was first black man to reach the rank of lieutenant there when I promoted him. And Harry, it was a spontaneous thing. He took a knee because Harry knows that community. Harry works with that community. And Harry has a lot of respect for what's going on. Harry's also the first one to pull officers back when they start stepping over the line. Harry's also the first one to call officers on their bad behavior. So a lot of us understand and we feel this. Just because we're blue doesn't mean we're not black.
Right. And last question I have for you. How does it feel when the black community, they almost target the police officer, the black police officers, because they're angry and they look at you, you Uncle Tom, you sell out, why would you be working for here? And it's almost like we're really angry with the white racist officer, but then we see you in that uniform, and to us, you're representing blue, you're holding up the blue line. How does that make you feel as a police officer that we're literally taking out our anger, even maybe more so on the black police officer?
You know, it doesn't make me feel that bad in that I understand that anger. Yeah. I understand that anger. And I think, you know, when you understand it, you can better absorb it and deal with it. But I also let a lot of those same people know that if I'm not here, if I'm not right here, we don't know what might be happening to you.
Interesting.
And we have those conversations. You know, when I got to Ferguson, they protested me the day I arrived. By the time I left, some of the main protesters, actually, one, they threw a party to give me a few gifts, but they also begged me not to leave. So you can build relationships.
And what you're saying is true, because I got friends who are down there protesting, coming from Chicago to protest, and you got some respect on the street.
Yeah.
All right, thank you so very much. We're going to turn it back over to Kenneth Kilpatrick. Be safe out there today. Tell our wonderful Golden Panthers that we love them, we support them, and you have a great day, sir.
You do the same. Thank you.
All right, pause up. So for all of those who are watching, when we say pause up, I know, and we talk about Panthers, I know you're getting scared. You're like, oh my God, the Black Panthers have infiltrated the police. No, the Golden Panther is the state or the logo or the mascot for Florida International University. So calm down, simmer down. All right, Kenneth, we are coming to you, my friend. You deal with youth who have previous experiences with law enforcement. How have their experiences shaped the way they view police? And then what are you doing to try to build and improve police and community relations?
Well, you know, first of all, you know, I was a black youth myself.
Your microphone, for some reason, I can barely hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, much better. Thank you.
I have to almost eat the computer. I have to get some.
As long as you brush your teeth this morning, we all right.
No, but you know, I was a young man myself, you know, many moons ago, having to deal, you know, with officers who were, you know, not so friendly towards our community. So one of the things that we do with our youth, we teach them a lot of different things. You know, when we receive youth, they've already committed, you know, some sort of infraction. So we look at a first wave of corrections that deal with counseling, you know, for theft and things like that, and how to interact, you know, with police officers in the future and so forth. We also look at what we can do with the family. We do site visits, and we go home, we talk to mom or dad, you know, if applicable. Sometimes there's neither, right? You know, there's some real horror stories out there, man, with with our young people have to deal with. So it's a very challenging moment for us always when we're dealing with young people and having to get them through life, first of all. And then there's another wave of, okay, now how do you get past officer friendly, who may, rough you up just because you're a kid and perceive that you don't have any options or outlets, nobody to call. So one of the things another thing that we do is we make sure, hey, if you guys have any issues with adults, be it police officers, anything like that, let us know. We know people. We can make some phone calls and so forth, but stay alive. They ask you to sit over here and sit down or whatever. If you think it's not fair, get a car number, get a badge number, and come tell us. So it's just things like that. And again, working with the family, which is a very important aspect of juvenile justice, and moving forward. And another thing that we've done proactively, we've been working with the state legislature, Representative Bush and Rep. McGee as well, and some others for the past 2 years, looking at direct filing of youth to adult jails. And so mandatory direct file was actually repealed in the 2019 session, which is a big deal. So now all of the direct filing is now mandatory, is now discretionary, and so we're working on that as well, because what a lot of folks don't know as well is once a kid gets, sort of captured and put into this criminal justice system, it's a really, really dangerous snare. It's not good to put kids with adults, and once they're in the adult environment, there are no services that are offered to young people.
I was told that Florida has the highest amount of juveniles being charged in adult court than any other state in America. Why is that? And maybe Rep. McGee, you may have an answer to this. Why is that? What's going on in Florida that so many kids are being charged as adults?
Well, and that's a great question, Dwayne. And it also goes back to the zero tolerance policies that we're seeing throughout the state and throughout the school districts. There are many ingredients that go into this. So we're looking at the zero tolerance. We're also looking at the fact that, again, sensitivity training, and some people actually believe the best way to deal with young African American kids is through the police system, through the criminal justice system. Unfortunately, and that has been a reality for some who are quote unquote the gatekeepers in their way of seeing things. But for us, we never bargained for being arrested and taken to jail for crimes that we committed. It's especially as a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, or 12-year-old. But let's be absolutely clear also, there are some crimes that should be direct file as it relates to those enumerated crimes, such as murder, such as rape, such as explosives and bodily injury, seriously bodily injury to individuals when in fact the individual knew about what he or she was doing. So in those situations, yeah, there may be an area where the argument will not benefit us because of the nature of those particular crimes. But when it comes down to young kids just being kids, there is no way in hell we should be sitting back supporting a system that says lock them up. Because let's be absolutely clear. I was in special ed. Yes, special ed, emotionally handicapped from kindergarten to the 12th grade. And, they had me locked in the classroom with about 12 other students. And they had us there because we had emotional problems, behavioral problems, psychological problems. And,
Which, according to the AMA, the American Medical Association and the American Psychological Association, if you are Black in America, you got psychological problems, because this is a white racist society that's systemic, that from education, healthcare, housing, economic. So if you Black in America and you walking around saying you normal and sane, you crazy, and you better get some help real quick. So I'm sorry, please continue.
So in those classrooms, I saw firsthand what the criminal justice system was able to do to my friends. A few of us were able to escape.
I only believe there are about 2 of them actually made it out without having some form of interaction with the police department. So, the best way we do that is we deal with it through legislation. We have to keep brothers like you at the forefront, making sure and calling a spade, calling wrong wrong. And we also have to make sure we work with law enforcement to remind them that, listen, simply because the hue of my skin is a little more different than yours doesn't necessarily mean that there should be some sort of misunderstanding as it relates to my competency, whether it relates to my intelligence, or whether or not I'm able to comprehend the reality in which I live in. So, legislatively, we must deal with it. And secondly, we must deal with it as a cultural bias that for some reason, young African-American kids are being seen as a threat, therefore being forced into a criminal justice system that is really not the place for them, with the exception of those who do create or commit those very heinous crimes like premeditated murder or rape with or rape of those nature.
So let me ask you this, and both of you can hit this. So the community, again, because on my Facebook, I have a diverse group. I literally have white supremacists on my Facebook. I got Black Power movement on my Facebook. And we always try to keep it respectful and we try to keep it solution-based. What are some solutions that the community can implement? Let's say they don't know what to do. How does the legal system, what can they do with their representatives, with their senators, with their congressmen to implement and to help you, give you the tools that what you're saying right now of keeping these Black young people out of the criminal justice system? Is there anything they can do, or is the system just so stacked against us that it can't be changed, and do you just have to burn it down?
Well, 2 things. The first thing you want to do, and I'll be very quickly on this one. I'm sorry, I got to run. I got to go back to a repass. I was at a funeral earlier, and so I came back here. The first thing you have to do, they have to vote. You remember, and one of the greatest examples I can give you, when I was as a prosecutor trying cases, we are always told that we would be judged by our peers. There were times when I would prosecute cases and I would look over at the defendant, and I know deep down the defendant was thinking what I was thinking. Like, if this is really about, being judged by your peers, then that jury pool is not a true representation of what's really happening.
Right.
So we got to get more people to understand that the importance of a jury pool is as much as important as anything else as it relates to this process. Because once they're in, now we need someone from our culture, somebody from our experience to be able to come in and hear the facts of the case and be able to say, you know what, I understand why he said and I understand why he did that. Simply putting your hand on your waist while you're speaking or using your hand while you're talking to law enforcement is not resisting arrest without violence, right? So that's why we need more people to understand. First of all, you have to vote in order to protect us at the front door. But once we're inside of that house, the house of horror, the house of pain due to the inaction and the inability of people to really appreciate who we are. And once we're inside that court system, then we need folk who understand the jury system to say it's not resisting arrest without violence, because
so then we as a people need to stop avoiding, because I know I've honestly done it a couple times. I've avoided, I had a meeting, but I just avoided it because I saw that I could. So you said it's very important to serve your jury duty as well.
Oh my God. If voting is the key to change, then I tell you what, the couch of understanding and the couch of redemption is found within that jury. That jury plays God for the length of that trial. That jury is your judge, it is your lawyer, it is everything. The buck stops with that jury, because statistics have shown that if you're found guilty, even if you didn't commit the crime, chances of a successful appeal of those matters and those facts are very slim. Henceforth, this is why it matters that you vote for particular judges, particular representatives, because of that.
Brother, listen. Oh, I'm so happy to have met you. You are powerful. Please continue doing what you're doing. And the last thing I want to say before you get to that repass is, you mentioned because of the hue of your skin. Brother, when God said, let's make man, he reached down into that black earth and it came up with a man that looked just like you. So keep being strong, keep being powerful, and keep doing what you're doing, brother. We need you. You're necessary. Thank you.
No, thank you. And I love that bald head of yours, my brother. We bald men, we have to stick together, man. Black people wouldn't understand that, but we bald men.
Appreciate you, brother. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. All right, Kenneth, you and I, we're going to take it to the end, baby. We ain't going to stop until we get to the finish line. We ain't going to run to the finish line. We're going to run through the finish line. So now, we done heard a lot. So what do you tell the young people who are out there like, you know what, we're just not going to take it anymore, these racists, blah, blah, blah. What do you say? Because you're an older guy, but you work with the young people. So what is the balance here?
You know, we have to get more involved. And I think my hat with the Civic Association in Brownsville and all of the great work that the association has done throughout the years has really opened my eyes to that process. Young people can't just wait to go to court and hope we get a good jury. You know, your parents and your brothers and sisters, we got to get out of the houses and we got to get down to these commission meetings. We got to get up there to Tallahassee so that when someone like Keone McGee is up there and he needs a packed chamber for a key committee meeting, he gets it. We've got to get more involved. It's got to be more than just a few people. It's got to be more than just your politicians who are going out and doing it. When they look behind them, there's no army behind them to support them.
So it's not enough to complain at home. You got to support these politicians. You got to get out of your house, get into the streets, come and vote, register to vote, and show up.
You have to do it. I wanted to say one thing. I wanted to go back to our earlier discussion.
And this is the last thing because they're giving me a cue that we got to cut it off. Go right ahead.
All right. So TAP and the BCNA, and Reuben Roberts, NAACP, ACLU, we are a part of a broader coalition fighting for, and it's been about 3-4 years now, for the Independent Community Panel, which is a review panel, right, for police officers for police misconduct. So there's a lot of momentum for that right now, and we want the community to know that as this begins to roll out, either through an ordinance that perhaps Commissioner Jordan, who's been a big proponent of that, introduces, or whether it be through an amendment of our home rule charter, that's something that is key. It's going to be key because there's going to be an elected sheriff by 2024, which means there's no more of this police director from Miami-Dade Police. We're talking about half of the budget, $7 billion budget annually, is going to be going to law enforcement. So that's over $3 billion. It's going to be a big deal. So you're going to need a community panel in place for police misconduct because it's going to be much more than just, hey, I'm going to go to my mayor and I'm going to complain and this and that. You have to go to an elected official now who's going to have a lot more.
And Kenneth, you see Daddy just came home, don't you? You see? Daddy ain't let his kids keep playing around in the house.
Right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
That's the last thing I wanted to kind of put on the record.
Thank you. And listen, I want to thank you for all of the work that you're doing as well, because our young boys, many of them are there because they never had a father figure. So thank you for what you're doing for our young boys and girls as well. But thank you for being an outstanding citizen. And please continue to work, man, because we need you as well. Thank you. All right, Daddy-O. Oh, Russell!
How you doing, man? Hey, I got to tell you, excellent job. Excellent job today, man.
Thank you.
Yeah, we need people like you that can just put that fire behind the people that we have to hold accountable, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Listen, it was my absolute pleasure. I stayed up all night. I done looked at all these articles, printing up stuff, and I'm like, I can't let my brother Noel down, man. He knocked it out for me on Wednesday. I got to show up and represent.
Yeah, we really appreciate it, man. You made our Black Male Media Project very special.
Thank you. If ever you need me, let me know.
Oh, we're going to be calling you.
All right. I appreciate that. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Noel. I got to get ready to drive to Orlando.
All right, brother. And I would like to thank every single panelist who came on, every single leader. This is Dwayne Bryant. If you have any event dealing with police and community relations, he has a wide spectrum of things he speaks about. He has the book called The Stop. So I encourage you to connect with Dwayne Bryant. He's a phenomenal gentleman, and he is changing our community. Thank you so much, Dwayne.
Thank you, brother. Have a great day. Hey, Russell, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you. We'll be talking.
All right. Bye-bye.